Lecture is number 13. The title of our lecture is Orientation of Interpreting Studies. In other words, the direction where we are heading, So by the end of this lecture, you should be able to identify the main steps in completing and interpreting research project. In other words, if you want to continue or if you want to finish off your interpreting studies, you might need to carry out a research project. In other words, you should be able how to do research in interpreting studies. So today's lecture is about how to do an interpreting research. By the way, what you are going to learn today, you can apply to any type, not only to interpreting studies or to interpreting research projects, but you could amend it, you could modify it and apply it to any kind of research. So today's lecture is number 13. Probably the penultimate, the one before the last one, number 14. But this is a very important lecture. Why? Because it gives you some idea about how to do research. Okay, and if we could go together step by step, then you would be able to really see whether you are up to do research or not. I know you work, but you never know. You might be asked to do a bit of research here, a bit of research there, and then say, okay, I know now, I have some idea about doing research in interpreting studies. Can I benefit from them and apply them to my, to my kind of work? So it is very relevant. And at the end of the lecture, as usual, we'll practice some interpreting at paragraph levels. As I was saying, I mean, by now, after you have studied, let's say, about 12 lectures, and these 12 lectures must have given you some idea about about the discipline of interpreting studies. So when we talk about interpreting studies, you understand what we are talking about. In this case, if you or any of you would like to, for instance, to become a researcher, or would like to do some research in interpreting, then then this lecture would give you some idea. There are no, for instance, certain methods, specific methods, or ways or measures to do research, but this is a kind of multidisciplinary, criteria or paradigms or measures that would enable you to use when you want to do research. So if we could go through them one by one. If you want to do research in interpreting, and to be honest, I mean, in any field, you need to have some kind of an overview of the territory of interpreting. What we mean by an overview is to be able to say, okay, now I know interpreting, I know translation, and interpreting. I know what it means. I know that the types of interpreting according to setting, like business interpreting, community interpreting, conference interpreting, and so on and so forth. I know that interpreting could be classified according to constellations of interactions, like bilateral interpreting, multilateral interpreting, and so on. And then I say, all right, well, I can classify them as well according to typological parameters. Typological parameters like language modality, working mode, directionality, professional status, use of technology. Now, when you have this overview, this general idea of interpreting studies, then you say, okay, now I have some kind of understanding of what interpreting is about. I mean, you can see what you can see interpreting studies on like a plate. Say, okay, I know how to maneuver and what where to go and how to go about it. Now, you have this plate or this landscape, or you have an overview now. You need the second step. You need to identify, you need to find your, what we say, bearings, where you stand, your position, where you stand regarding, for instance, to your professional and academic environment. I mean, you need to ask yourself, am I going to become an academic like me, or you want to become a professional interpreter like someone who is working, who works for companies, organizations, TV channels, or United Nations? So you need to say, okay, this is interpreting, but I'd like to become a professional interpreter. Then, all right, no problem. So you need to decide and reflect on your position. Where do you stand? Do you want to work as an academic person like me, interested in translation studies, interpreting studies, and so on, and doing a bit of translation, a bit of interpreting whenever the opportunity arises? Or you want to become really a professional interpreter? So the decision is yours. So this is step number 2. So in step number 1, you have an overview. Step number 2, you say, okay, where do I stand? I stand here or there. Number 3. Okay. Now, when you have an overview, and when you have decided about your position, where to stand, these these bearings, or would give you an idea about the contextual factors. Contextual factors is the environment you are in, and what we mean by the environment is the prevailing research paradigms, as well as your relevant personal experience. These factors will help you determine and decide on the theory or the model you want to adopt in your studies. So you have an overview, you have where your position is, and the research paradigms, mean the research terms and conditions and requirements, and your personal experience. Are you an academic, or are you a practitioner, or are you into an academic? So all these factors help you to say, okay, I'm going to use this theory or this model. And I'm sure you know what we mean by theory, because you studied theory of translation. Theory is an explanation of a proposed explanation of an observable phenomenon, and a model is the realization of a theory. So you need to say, okay, I'm going to adopt this theory or that model or that approach or that method. All right. Number 4, what do you do Well, you need to choose the research topic. The research topic that interests you. Now, how to choose your research topic is a personal matter. What I mean by a personal matter, it means you're, for instance, you might be interested in for instance, interpreting. I would like to do research, for instance, on the problems or the benefits of using technology in interpreting. Or I want to, for instance, investigate the problems faced by an amateur interpreter in, for instance, community interpreting. Or I want to, for instance, identify the procedures and the procedure and steps that are necessary for a natural interpreter to become a professional interpreter. So you need to really find out. I mean, there are, you know, I mean, I cannot, for instance, tell you what, you know, what you could do or what you could not do. You might have a better idea than these ideas I'm giving you now. But the idea, the main idea is you need to have a topic of your research. You need to have a topic for your research. Now, when you have this topic and you say, okay, you need to explore, you need to find out in depth about, you know, your topic. You can't just say, I want to do this and I want to do that. That's it. No. What you need to do is to dig deeper and deeper. In other words, you need to read and read and read and read and read. And take notes, take notes, take notes, take notes. By doing a lot of reading, by exposing yourself to so many ideas, and as many researches as possible, of course done in relation to your topic, you will have a very profound idea and background to your particular topic. So you can expand, you can argue, you can investigate, you can discuss, you can explore, you can research your topic in a more efficient way. Why? Because you have read what X has done about this point and what Z has done about this point, and you say, all right, well, this bit is not enough and this bit is not enough. I can contribute to them, I can add, because I'm going to deal with this point from a different angle, from a different environment, from a different context. The context is in Saudi Arabia. I'm working here for the Saudi Channel 2, for instance, interpreting. Would I behave in the same way as I was working in the United Nations, or would I do as I would do in, for instance, doing community interpreting? You see, so you need to ask yourself so many questions, and asking questions give rise to more questions and more options for you to investigate. And when the idea becomes clear and mature, then you feel different about your topic. Now this is, so after you have read and read and read, then what you do, number 6, as I said, when you read, your reading helps you to formulate a specific research question and consider ways in which you might might be addressed. So when you have read so much about your particular point, you then ask questions. Can, for instance, can an Arabic speaking employee at Aramco work as a conference interpreter? Question mark. This is a question. Now this question becomes like a hypothesis. In other words, you say, if you claim yes he can, or if you claim no he can, then you reformulate your question and becomes like a hypothesis. You say those who work at Aramco can become conference interpreters, or those who work at Aramco cannot work as conference interpreters. And then you have to prove it, why and why not and why yes. You know, so it is vital to reach at this to a stage where you can really formulate your own questions. You know, and formulating your own questions helps you to formulate your own hypotheses. And then number 7, what you do, you know, you need to make your hypothesis as explicit as possible, very clear. For instance, Arabic speaking students are not as good in writing as in speaking. Now this is a hypothesis you are claiming, so you have to prove that what you are claiming is true or what you are claiming is not true. Which is, I mean, can they write as well as they can speak? You know, so you need to be able to make your hypotheses and or your questions as explicit, as clear as possible, so that the reader knows that Ali and Omar is clear and accurate and brief about what he wants to do, you know. So this is an important point you need to consider when you are doing any type of research, to be honest, you know, not only interpreting research projects. So number 7. Number 8, now after you have decided on your, I mean, after you have done an overview, after you have, you know, identified your position, your topic, you have read so much, and then you have identified the questions you want to answer, then you think, all right, how am I going to design my research? You know, how am I going to, you know, investigate my questions? Should I use, for instance, a question, should I use, what kind of design? Shall I use an empirical study design or a theoretical research study design? So the design is the format you want to use. Okay, I'm going, for instance, to use a questionnaire, and I'm going to use an interview, and then I am going to apply SPSS program to analyze my data, and then I will reach a conclusion, and then on the basis of the conclusion I can make recommendations. So this research design, or the methodology you adopt in your research, is very important, because the manner and the method you do to achieve your objective is very important. You can't just say, I say to you, open the window up in the ceiling, in the roof. I want to go to the attic, for instance. You say, how am I going to go up there? You say to me, I can't. For instance, I can't reach the ceiling. I know there is a hole in the ceiling, but I can't reach the ceiling. And even if I stand on a chair, so in this case, all right, I say no. Well, I just pull down a foldable stairs. I say, all right, this is how we do it. We pull down the stairs, a little window, we pull the stairs, you go up the stairs and you go into the attic. Then when you finish, you come back and you just leave it, and it will go back to how it was. So you need to really establish a method of doing anything. How am I going to deliver this lecture? Well, I'm going to do it this way, blah, blah, blah. So the research design is very important to you as a researcher. You have to think of it after you have done the first bits. Okay, now how to do this? How can you do this? You plan and you organize your study. So you need to have a plan. I'm going to do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. Now, how are you going to implement your research design? How are you going to implement? How are you going to carry out? You say, okay, I'm going to collect data, I'm going to process the data, and I'm going to analyze various types of data. So you collect data, you process data, you analyze data. After you have done collecting, processing, and analyzing, you say, all right, I'm going to evaluate, and interpret my findings. So you evaluate and you interpret, means to explain your findings. In relation to what? In relation to the research questions. You say, okay, my research, my findings seems to answer question number 1. My findings seems to answer question number 2, and my findings seems to answer question number 3. Okay, so this is how you go about, implementing your research design. You implement, then you say, you evaluate, you interpret, and then, all right, I say to you, how are you going to show this to me? You say, okay, I'm going to report it in this format. I'm going to give a presentation, I'm going to write a report, I'm going to write a research paper. So you need to report your findings. So you put it on paper. Okay? So this is really, these are the most important steps you need to understand when you are doing any research, really. you know. So please go through them and learn them by step, and try to apply them, not to interpreting studies only, to any task that your employer might ask you to do. Okay, Muhammad, I would like you to do this little project for us. Can you do that? You say, all right, well, let me have an overview. Okay, an overview. Right, what next? I say, okay, I need to really know where I stand. Can I do it? Am I an academic person, or am I a practitioner? Okay, I'm going to find out about really the title, the topic. Then when you find out about the topic, you say, okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to read what this company has done about it, this organization has done about it, or this person has done about it. So you read, and then you say, all right, I'm going to formulate certain questions. And these questions could be reformulated into hypotheses. And then you say, all right, how am I going to do this? You say, all right, I'm going to design a methodology about how to execute it, how to carry it out. So what you do, you plan and you organize your work. You plan it. And then you say, all right, how am I going to implement it? You say, okay, I'm going to collect data, I'm going to process it, I'm going to analyze it, and then you say, okay, I'm going to evaluate and interpret my findings. After that, okay, sir, I will produce to you a report on paper, and then I will present this to you, you know, on a PowerPoint slides. So, and then you make your result, you make your conclusions, and you reach your conclusions, and you make your own recommendations. Okay, so these are the steps you follow. Now, before we leave, I'd like you to interpret, for instance, interpret the following into Arabic. At least 14 people died and scores more were injured in an explosion at the main headquarters of Mexico's state-owned oil company in Mexico City Thursday. Now, مات ما يقارب 14 شخصا وعشرات آخرين جرحوا في انفجار حصل في قيادة في رئاسة تملكها مدينة مكسيكو سيتي يوم الخميس. The blast damaged the 3 floors of the building. دمر أو خرب الانفجار 3 طوابق من البناء وسبب بانهيار وسبب بمئات من الناس أن تذهب إلى الشوارع، وسبب أيضا بسحاب من الدخان فوق سماء مكسيكو سيتي. Interior Minister Miguel Angelo Osorio Chong said 80 people were injured along with the 14 dead, but told local television the death toll could still rise. صرح وزير الداخلية مايكل أنجلو أوساريو بأن 80 شخصا جرحوا إضافة إلى 14 ماتوا. وقال أيضا وأخبر أو صرح على التلفزيون المحلي بأن عدد الموتى قد يزداد، ما زال في ازدياد. This is a very quick, brief and interpreting, you know. So really you need to practice. You need to practice as much as you can, and some of you might be able to interpret better than me. And interpreting, you don't prepare. As you can see, I did not, on purpose, I did not prepare. Why? To tell you that this is how it is done. People speak and you interpret. Because if I had prepared it, I would have given you the interpreting in a very professional and fluent way. But then you would say, "Oh, doctor, you must have prepared." No, I did not prepare any interpretation, any interpreting exercise, to give you the impression that even someone like me, on the spot, it is not easy to interpret. It needs and it requires a lot of knowledge, skill, and experience. So you better do this when you are young, you know, if you are into interpreting. Now this one, interpret the following into English. رجل يعرض أمه للبيع. A man offers his mother for sale. في ليلة زواج العريس، وبالتحديد أثناء الحفل وهو جالس بجانب العروسة في المنصة. On a wedding night, while celebrating, and the groom was sitting next to the bridegroom, and his mother was dancing happily because her son is getting married. Now the bridegroom whispered in his ear, saying to him, "Ask your mom to sit down, she is embarrassing us." Then أخذ العريس الميكروفون وقال: "من يشتري أمي?" The bridegroom took the microphone and said, "Who buys my mother?" And he said it twice. "Who buys my mother? Who buys my mother?" Of course, nobody answered. He said, "Who buys my mother?" And then I will leave the story for you to do. You know, it's a nice story. I leave it for you to translate and to interpret. So again, I leave you with this exercise to do from English into Arabic, and this is from Arabic into English. You know, and I hope that you have benefited from today's lecture, and I would like to thank you very much for listening and watching me, and I'll see you next week inshallah for the lecture number 14 and the final lecture. Thank you very much and goodbye.